Welcome to this edition of the MDM podcast. I'm Tom Gale, CEO of Modern Distribution Management. At the end of 2019, the wholesale distribution industry was already surfing a wave of digital and demographic transformation. Then came COVID, remote work, supply chain, talent, one shock after another. We're just coming through the wildest business cycle in almost 100 years. As MDMs have documented over the past 3 years, some distributors adapted more quickly and thrived while others struggled. Traditional top-down command and control management structures and leadership styles that were effective for decades have been seriously challenged. So I'm excited to speak today with Alain Hunkins, leadership consultant and author, about his passion and work and his insights on how we can become better and more effective leaders. Alan, welcome.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's a pleasure to be here with you today.
You lead your bio with a statement that says, Alain Hunkins helps high-achieving people become high-achieving leaders. Tell me why you frame it that way, and how did that become your mission?
Well, interesting thing. I love the question. Thanks. So I think many listeners can probably resonate with this, which is the fact that, and this is sort of just almost an archetype, is that so many people wind up in leadership roles because they were excellent doers, right? That's the high performers, right? So we're excellent doers. You're such a good, whatever it is, you're such a good salesperson. You're such a good project manager. You're such a good engineer. And so we think you're so good at this, we're going to promote you. And now you're going to lead a team of people who do what you did. But as most of us know, what makes you, for example, a good salesperson has very little to do with making you a good sales leader of people who do that. And what many of us tend to think is like, I'll just tell other people to do what I did and they'll be successful. And this is the big gap. And so my work is really about helping people to rethink leadership, because most of us lead based on the examples that have been set for us, good, bad, and ugly. And so we're not necessarily conscious and intentional about what are the things that are going to get us the best result. And I think for many leaders today, the models that we had and the ones that really cling to, these are models from the 1970s, the 1980s, the 1990s. That was a very different workplace. And as you said in the intro today, the world has changed significantly. And I think all the seeds that were planted were kind of blown wide open with the pandemic. And so recognizing that today's follower is in a very different position than the follower of even 10 or 15 years ago. And as such, we need to change how we lead. I talked to lots of leaders, and last week I was with a group, and a number of CEOs said, well, you don't understand, but back in my day, and I sort of stopped them and say, time out. It's not your day anymore. This isn't your day. This is someone else's day. And you're now having to lead in a new day, which means you need to have a new mindset and new skills. And so my work is really about helping these high-performing people become high-performing leaders in today's economy.
And we're going to dig into that in our conversation today. But before that, give a little background in terms of how you got where you are today.
Gosh, yeah, certainly doing this work is not something I thought I'd be doing when I was 6 years old, going, I want to be I want to be a leadership author. And no, that's not exactly. So really what comes down to, if I had to look at the through line in my life, it has really been fascinated with people. I'd say that's the general through line. It has taken different shapes and forms throughout. So at one point in my life early on, I was definitely interested in psychology. In fact, I came this close, and for those that can't see us, I'm holding my hands very close together to go to social work school to become a psychotherapist at one point. My undergrad was in liberal arts, very broad, eclectic. I studied psychology there. But actually, so from there, where I ended up was getting into the performing arts. I actually have a master's in fine arts from an acting conservatory, which might seem very different, but it turns out that actually leadership is a lot about understanding that you are on stage and that everything you do and say sends a message, and everything you don't do and say sends a message. And you have to realize it isn't about what you think about it, is how does your audience think about it? So it actually turned out to be great training. So based on my work in graduate school, I ended up doing a bunch of work with off-Broadway theater companies, both performing as well as doing arts and education in schools, doing leadership training and conflict resolution. And that led me to someone saying, have you ever thought about working in businesses? Now, you have to understand that my dad and my stepmom, my dad was a jazz pianist and my stepmom was an actress. They were both kind of ex-hippies who I grew up hearing like, corporations are evil. Like, they're the man, like, don't work for the man, things like that. So I was very poo-pooed when I was going in undergrad, like, I can't do this. But what I found was, surprise, surprise, people are people are people wherever you go. And these same issues show up in organizations. And so I found myself, this was 1997, I cut my teeth working for a training company, and our clients were Fortune 500 companies. And I worked for them full time for over 10 years. And then I started to freelance with some other companies as well. And then out of all that, I started seeing all these patterns emerge, and I started writing, and all that writing led to the publication of this book, Cracking the Leadership Code, which was published on March the 24th, 2020. You'll remember that was the second week of the pandemic when we lost our collective minds. And since then, really have used that to rebrand myself and my company as Hunkins Leadership Group. And so, but really the through line has always been, how can I help people to get better in one way, shape, or form or another?
You touched on a couple of things there where you were talking about leadership, but there was also a lot of connections with sales in terms of the performance, really being empathetic in terms of understanding the audience. Before we get into that, what's your take on the state of leadership as we end 2023?
Oh, I love this question. The state of leadership is it's a big question mark. It's the state of leadership right now. Some people are getting what needs to happen intuitively and making the necessary shifts. And some people and organizations are struggling because they cannot let go of the inherited leadership legacy of the past. And a lot of this has to do with the fact, and I write about this too quite a bit, is, basically so many of our leadership models are really vestiges of the industrial age, that old school command and control world whereby, the term supervisor comes from the idea of someone literally standing on a balcony, supervising above the shop floor, watching all of those people working on the assembly line, doing repetitive manual labor. My favorite example on this, if everyone knows Henry Ford, who famously said of his employees, "Why is it every time I want a pair of hands, they come with a brain attached?" Right? So, and the thing is, in the Ford Motor Company, their most famous product being the Model T Ford, the Ford Motor Company had that car running on the assembly line with zero changes for over 20 years. Just think about the rate of change that we live in today versus then. And so all of which to say is, we have leaders today who still think, because I'm your boss, that's why. That's why you have to listen to me. And that will not get you anything beyond, at bare minimum, compliance. And the fact is, we live in a world where innovation is paramount, being able to do things in new and better ways, being able to be flexible and responsive and nimble to the customer. I love to tell leaders that I don't care what business you're in, you're all being compared to Amazon, because every person as a consumer knows what it's like to one click, and they know the ease of use of what that customer experience is like. And so they go, okay, so I can one click here as a consumer. Now I'm working with you. Why is it 30 clicks and I still can't get anywhere? And so the expectations from the customer side have shifted. And frankly, the expectations from the employees side, what we expect from our leaders, is so much more than we ever expected before. And with technology, we have the transparency to know where the grass is greener. 15 years ago, we didn't have Indeed and Glassdoor and LinkedIn. And so people are moving to where they're moving to. And throw on top of that the wrinkle that now, if you have companies that are willing to hire a remote workforce from anywhere, suddenly your competition has completely expanded. So what is going to make you the employer of choice? So you throw all these different things into the mix. You think, wow, leaders have their job cut out for them today. And how are you going to lead remotely, hybridly, in person? How are you doing it, and why? What's your reason that you have to give? Are you saying you have to be back in the office for 3 days a week because we say why? So it is fascinating times, Tom. It really is. And I think leaders definitely have their work cut out for them.
You've worked with companies across every sector of the economy, and we track a lot of the transformations that wholesale distribution companies are going through, from this traditionally outside sales model to much more of the omni-channel and, as you said, really adapting to how customers are changing and what their expectations are for their experience. Are there any characteristics of distributors that you've experienced that make for some unique leadership challenges or opportunities out there?
Yeah, well, I think, part of it is, depending on, and this is true across distributors, true across large organizations, is how connected are you to your customer? right? So are you truly and it could be an internal customer, it could be an external customer, but how connected are you in understanding what their real needs are versus what you think their needs are? Because if you're operating from a model of, I think I know what they need, but I really haven't validated it, your level of decision making is really going to be compromised. So I would say a good place to start is, do we really have honest and open conversations with our customers to really understand what it is that they need? And also, do you have the emotional intelligence and wherewithal to recognize that sometimes when a customer says that what they need, that's the presenting need, but actually there's a deeper need underneath. And the thing is, as human beings, we all have certain universal needs that they transcend industry. So we all have a need to be respected. We have a need to be recognized, listened to, validated in who we are. And so those are all parts of the and part of respect, for example, is, do you respect my time? In terms of your processes, are you easy to do business with because that values me and my time, that I have other things to do? So these are things that I think that it's important for leaders across channels to consider.
And that's interesting because most people will kind of think about that customer experience aspect as something very distinct from having anything to do with leadership in a lot of ways.
Oh, it's so connected. I've been on many customer experience podcasts, and we talk about customer experience and leadership experience. And the fact is, if you think about it, what leaders do more than anything else is we create cultures, right? So great leaders create culture intentionally and by design. Poor leaders are creating cultures accidentally by default. They're like, oh, I didn't think about the impact this would have. Oh, you have to wait. Let's take it, employee onboarding, right? For example, what's the experience of your new employees onboarding to your company? Are they walking away on day 1 and day 2, going home to their families and saying, oh my gosh, this is the best company. I got so lucky working here. Are they going, oh gosh, this is going to be horrible? I mean, I had to sit around and wait to I had to go to sit in security for 2 hours to get my badge and my laptop sorted out. Because they're all of these things are these moments of truth. And as leaders, this doesn't happen by accident. It happens by design. And if our designs are flawed, people are going to have lousy experiences. And we live in this world of experience economy. And we just keep moving further and further into this, where people want autonomy and control over their experiences. They want to be able to opt in and opt out. And how do you serve that? And you could say, well, that wasn't how it was when I started. But again, this is not your day. So we have to be really understanding of where our employee base is coming from today.
In the book that you mentioned here, you defined leadership by 3 specific dimensions across connection, communication, and collaboration. Talk about that framework and some of the elements of it.
Yeah, happy to. And I should mention, by the way, this framework of connection, communication, collaboration, it isn't just that they rhyme and they start with C. It wasn't like I just sat at my desk and went, oh, what would be clever? So my work primarily before being an author is I'm a practitioner. I work with literally at this point, I think we're up to over 4,000 groups in 28 countries. So this model emerged from me witnessing teams and leaders and organizations. I kept seeing what were the common things that kept showing up time and time again. And so they were these 3 things: connection, communication, and collaboration. So I'll start with connection. The fact is, I don't care what industry you are in, first and foremost, you are in the human being business. And I know it's very easy for us in the business world to get very romantically involved with our numbers, right? We love our metrics. We love our projections and our forecast and hitting those numbers and our targets. But let's recognize and call it what it is. The fact is, all the things that you measure at work, all those metrics are only lagging indicators of the behaviors of a person. Some person has done something somewhere to create that metric. And so wouldn't it be great if, instead of focusing on the numbers and then forgetting about the people, if we prioritize focusing on the people, because it's the people that deliver those numbers. So we want to create environments, like I said before, create environments where people can do their best work. And that only comes if they feel that there's a sense of connection. So some terms that you've heard around this have to do things like trust, psychological safety, empathy, so that people can show up and be themselves. You've heard the idea of bringing your whole self to work. So what the research shows is that when people can feel safe and bring their whole self to work, is they're much more engaged and they're much more productive. So one of my colleagues, Tony Schwartz, did a great research article that was published in the New York Times a few years ago. And it turns out that the number one thing that creates more engaged and productive people is, do they feel valued and cared for by their immediate supervisor? Now, Tom, let's face it, valued and cared for, if there was ever a soft and fuzzy metric, that's it, right? Pretty much, valued, but it's true. So the research supports that. So that's connection, right? Being human to human, creating strong bonds of connection. It's the basis of all good working business relationships. The second piece is around communication. And now I like to tell leaders that you have to recognize that the default setting for human communication is in fact misunderstanding. And the reason that that's so is because what is super crystal clear to you is crystal clear to you because you live in your own mind 24/7, 365. So of course it's clear. It's obvious because you're you. So you have all the backstory, the context, additional insights. No one else does. And so to close the gap between what we mean and what we say and what other people hear, we have to buttress things with scaffolding. And so part of the work is around how do we communicate, not for the goal of communication, but for the goal of, as much as possible, 100% accurate understanding. And the reason that's so important is because understanding, for better or worse, is the platform on which we make all decisions. So if we have a solid, strong foundation of understanding, we're going to make good decisions. If it's a wobbly, I think I know what they mean, we're going to make not as good decisions and we'll yield the fruit accordingly. So that's communication. And then the third one is around collaboration. I've alluded to this one already, which is the fact that as leaders, we create environments, and a collaborative environment where people can show up and be their best means that leaders have been intentional by design. They are making sure that people are getting certain fundamental human needs met. And in my research, I found there are 4 pivotal needs that must get met for people to do their best work. The first I've mentioned as well, it's a need for safety. People have to feel both physically safe as well as psychologically safe. The next one is people have a need for energy. We know that certain work environments energize people. Other work environments drain people's energy. What does your work environment do? The third one is around ownership. The fact is, I've yet to meet a single person who has said, you know what I love about my leader is how much they micromanage me. Like said nobody ever. And so what are you doing to create autonomy? And so people can bring their own creative self to work. Again, not that they can do anything. You have to give them the clear what, but give them some guardrails so they can come up with their own how. So that's all around ownership. And then the fourth piece that gives people a need is purpose, the sense that what they do makes a difference, that what they do matters. Because we know that when you have a sense of purpose to anything you do, you bring more of yourself and you're more effective at it. So again, those 4 needs are safety, energy, ownership, and purpose. And those fall underneath collaboration, which sits around with connection and communication.
So what do you see across those dimensions, the connection, communication, and collaboration, as the most challenging to adopt and execute on?
That's a great question. I would say, look, they're all interrelated. In fact, the model is concentric circles with connection in the heart of it. And because of that, and also the experience I have working with leaders and coaching leaders as well, I'd say that connection may be the hardest one to start with, if you think about it really, because, well, here's another thing. I know we talked about the fact that you have a lot of people who get promoted to leadership roles. You also have a lot of people who get promoted or want to be promoted into people manager or leadership roles, because in many organizations, the only way to get status, to get increased in salary, is to become a people manager. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people who are in those roles that, honestly, Tom, they don't like people a whole lot. They don't care about people. And the thing is, as human beings, our brains have evolved to have really good BS detectors. So if someone is kind of going through the motions and don't really care about us as a person and sees us much more as I call it a task getter doner, right? Just like, you're just here to get this job done, we're not going to feel connected to them. And so, and the same is true around this whole idea of empathy. I've been talking a lot about empathy, especially since the pandemic, right? So I define empathy as showing people that you understand them and care how they feel. And somehow in our mono-focused brains, a lot of leaders hear that and say, oh gosh, if I'm empathizing with people, I can't hold them accountable. Or if I'm empathizing with people, we're never going to get any work done. We're just going to sit around and talk about how we're feeling all day. And so what they're doing is they're completely overreacting and irrationally thinking that somehow we're going to turn this thing into an adult daycare center. And it's not. I mean, the fact is, part of good leaders mindset is the ability to embrace paradox. So yes, you can empathize and show people how you care about how they feel and understand them. And not and you can also have clear expectations and hold people accountable. These things are not mutually exclusive. But I think there's a lot of leaders out there that still are like, oh, I don't want to come across as seeming weak, right? So somehow their idea of strong is I have all the answers. I'm going to tell you what to do, and I never let you see me sweat. What world do you live on? Like, what planet is this? I mean, what leader in today's world has all the answers? I mean, tell me when 2020 came around and the pandemic started, you had all the answers. Please, we know you don't have the answers. Don't pretend you. No one expects leaders to have the answers. And hopefully you recognize that as a relief. Get off the pedestal, take off the superhero cape. People don't need that from you. What they want is a human being who is willing to work with them and tries to like remove the barrier so they can do their best work. Don't think of yourself as needing to have all the answers. Instead, think of yourself more as the facilitator in chief who can go around and ask good questions and move information from where it is to where it needs to be so we can act on it so that we and our customers can all succeed. So I would say it starts with connection, Tom. That's and for many people, that is the hardest one. And you have a lot of people, let's face it, in roles of leadership who wouldn't describe themselves as people. And that's hard for them to figure this stuff out. The good news is these are all skills that can be learned. Just like you can pick up a 5-pound dumbbell at the gym, you do that for a few weeks, you'll be picking up a 10-pound dumbbell. You will get stronger at these things if you practice them.
So let's dive into that a little bit, because I hear you talk about the empathy aspect of this, and I'm assuming this is really all about developing stronger emotional intelligence skills, capabilities. And what you're saying is that's really the central ingredient to what leadership is now today and is going to continue to be what it's going to look like going forward.
Yeah, no, very much so. I'd say that, empathy is sort of the basis of empathy. Before you can really show people that you understand them and care how they feel, you have to be tuned in, right? You have to have that relationship awareness. And for those that are familiar with the emotional intelligence model, the primary competencies are, first of all, self-awareness, which is how am I feeling? Do I notice the difference between what anger and fear and joy and sadness feels like? Those are, I call those the primary colors of emotion. Can I recognize when I'm feeling those things? Some people can't, honestly. So there's the first is the self-awareness. And the next piece is relationship awareness. Can I I noticed, look, Tom's coming into this. Tom's face looks a bit clenched. I wonder, he might be upset about, hey, Tom, what's going on? You seem a little down today. And just to notice that and to open up a conversation in a non-judgmental and curious way. So absolutely, it starts with that. And I think one of the biggest barriers, and my research has found this too, is I think the biggest barrier to leading with empathy, because people get it in theory. People are like, yep, I get it. We're human beings. Show people you understand them, care how they feel. I get it. I do that. The fact is, we're all, as human beings, we're wired to empathize with other people. But the challenge is we don't empathize with all other people equally. So your immediate friends and family, like the people that you love the most, like some people say, I'll die for my kids. You have a lot of empathy for those people. Strangers, not so much. And let's put it into the business context. When suddenly we've got pressures and deadlines and limited resources and customer demands, guess what? Empathy can go out the window pretty quickly. We're like, come on, just get it done. Got to get it done. So the biggest barrier I see that leaders have to leading with empathy is actually time. Because the fact is, while in our digital age, so many things move at the speed of light, human beings travel at the speed of human beings. And so showing people that you understand them and care how they feel actually means slowing down. And if you live in this constant adrenaline-soaked go, 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 the idea of slowing down feels scary. It's like, I can't afford to slow down. But here's the thing. Again, this is another paradox, is that, and I have nothing against driving for results and having action and getting great results. Of course, you want to do that in your business. So do I. The thing is, driving for results should not come at the expense of driving over people who are trying to deliver those results with you. So part of leadership wisdom is that there's a time and a place to go slow and a time and a place to go fast. And you have to have the wisdom to know the difference. And so believe it or not, and I'll just share a quick example that you all listening can use. Simple thing, you might be doing something similar to this, is when you start, let's say it's your weekly or your monthly operational meeting, before you just jump into like, okay, what's going on? Show me the numbers. Before you do all that, do a quick check-in with your team. And I'll give you 3 questions you can use. You're welcome to use these and try them out and tell me how it goes. So 3 questions, really simple. And the more you do this, each person can take less than a minute to check in. And here are the 3 questions. The first question is, how are you feeling today? And by the way, the answer to that, I call it, the answer's got to be a level 2 or a level 3 feeling. Because a level 1 answer is, I'm fine, Tom. How are you? I'm not really saying anything. So the answer is like, no, really, how are you feeling? So the first question is, how are you feeling? So it gives people a chance to check in. Second question is, what's on your mind or what's distracting you, right? Because the fact is, we're all busy people. We've got lots going on. So we're not going to solve what's distracting you, but we're just going to name it. And I won't get into all the neuroscience behind it, but basically, when you verbalize all of that stuff that is floating around in your head, it actually calms your central nervous system so people can be more present and focused and more engaged and productive. So the second question, what's on your mind or what's distracting you? And the third question is, how can I, or if it's a group, how can we support you? You start doing those 3 questions as part of your routine, checking in with people, you will be amazed at how much people, A, come to want it and expect it, but also how much more focused and productive the rest of your meeting is going to be. So again, it's a little bit of investment up front, and then it's going to pay dividends. And if, in fact, it's interesting because this is another whole thing that we can talk about, is so many leaders that I work with, I find, in addition to having people leader responsibilities, are also doing their own project thing, right? You have your own, so they're wearing multiple hats. And so what we end up, if we're in that multiple hat place, we end up seeing the people leader side as this distraction, like, oh, I got to deal with my team. What I really want to do is this creative project and get this stuff done because that feels more fulfilling. And so what we end up doing is we see this time spent with other people as this cost. Like, I don't have time. I don't have time with my people. I don't have time. So it's this mentality of scarcity, which is fear, and cost. And I ask leaders to reframe this. What if instead you thought of time with your people as an investment? And I think anyone would know, whoever, if you have a good leader, a good 20, 30-minute conversation with a great leader can set somebody up for 40 hours of amazing work. And conversely, a lack of those kind of meetings, people will be treading water and doing just whatever they can do to get by. So reframing these things is cost versus investment. So I'd say that all falls under the category of connection and ways to build empathy and relationship and trust with people.
There may be 1 or 2 listeners to this who may consider themselves somewhat in that old school leader camp, and because it's worked really well for decades, and they're listening to your recommendations here, and what's going through my mind is they're going to show up at the operational meeting on Monday, and all of a sudden start to go into those 3 questions, and everybody's going to freak out around the table because they're wondering what the heck Joe is, what happened to Joe over the weekend. Gotcha.
Well, let me give you a little clue here, Joe. And in fact, it's funny because I actually had a leader said this exact same question. Like, well, if I did this next week, they're going to think I'm weird because that's so off. Look, and this is all part of the new school leadership. Don't pretend like you have all the answers. In fact, be transparent with your process. So in this case, we'll call him Joe because you did. Joe, come into the operational meeting on Monday and say, hey, folks, I've been thinking about ways that we can become a stronger team. And I heard this thing on this podcast, and it sounds like it might work. Can we try this? And let me know your feedback. You see, suddenly, then the onus is off you coming in going, look how perfect I am. Here's the new tool. It's going to help us. Again, drop the superhero act. Instead, just be transparent. We're going to try something new. Tell me how it works, because people trust that. People don't trust the other one. So Joe, just tell them what you're doing before you do it, and then they'll come along on the ride with you.
So you wrote the book, as you said it. You released it in March 2020, and a whole different workplace culture world. Almost 4 years later, with hybrid workplaces and companies struggling to create strong cultures, what's changed?
Well, a few things have changed. Absolutely. Right. So we look at the world now. I mean, one thing that changed was if you are like, look, if you're in retail and you had, or healthcare where you had to have people on site, or your barber, this doesn't apply. But if you had the opportunity where people could work remotely, they did. And, there's an old, I forget what musical it comes from. They say like, but once people have had a taste of Paris, you can't put them back out on the farm, right? Maybe you know where that comes from. But so this is the thing is, once people have a taste of that kind of autonomy that remote work brought, they went, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I can just work and I don't have to deal with a commute. I don't have to deal with office politics. And So suddenly, I mean, from a worker perspective, their sense of autonomy and like that met a need. They didn't even realize they had it so much, right? So that changed hugely. And then the other thing we found is like this level of urgency because we were going through a global health crisis. People certainly for the first year were actually working a lot harder at home because everyone was just kind of in panic and stress mode. So that settled down a bit. And then as we started moving into, all right, we want to start bringing people back to the office. And then some organizations started to mandate that versus other ones. And people started going, hey, I don't know if I want to go back to the office all the time. And then the other thing in the middle of all that too is people started questioning. It's as if before the pandemic, we were all on this collective consumerist hamster wheel, just get going, trying to keep up with your credit card payments and whatever else you're trying to deal with. And then we press pause and everything has to stop. And for a lot of people, given the fact it was the pandemic and we're looking at life and death, and I imagine for many of us, it touched us personally. We knew people who died or got sick, etc. People started questioning their values. What do I really want from life? Is work all it's cracked up to be? And so people have questioned all these things, and we cannot underestimate the power of those kind of questions. And so people started thinking, do I want this? Do you know what? Hey, look, there's a job opening somewhere else and it's totally remote. And that sounds like the kind of life I want to have. Maybe I want to move out of this big, expensive city and move back to my small town where I grew up. So suddenly you look at all these shifts demographically that led, we're all familiar with the idea of the Great Resignation. So we saw all these things happening overall. And then that goes on for a while and people are like, all right, but come on, we have to get people back in the office. And so now you have all these people going, all right, so we have to get them back in the office. And then there's these executive team meetings like, well, but how many days? Is it 2 days? Is it 3 days? I don't know. What do you think? And so as one of the people that I've interviewed for some of my Forbes articles, a guy named David Rock, who runs the Neuro Leadership Institute, fascinating work they do over there, said to me, look, if you're asking the question 2 days a week or 3 days back in their office, you are asking the wrong question. The real questions we need to be asking ourselves is, how do we structure work so people can be as engaged and as productive as possible? And guess what? It is not a one size cookie cutter fit answer to that. So what are you doing? I'll give you examples. I've had clients have brought me in to facilitate working sessions because they brought people back in 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and they're going, but it doesn't feel the same. It feels different. It feels kind of sterile. And we just don't have the same culture that we had back in 2019. And so then I asked them, so let me ask you, when you have people coming back into the office, what are they doing differently? And of course they said, what do you mean? Which gives me a clue they haven't even thought through the question that much. And I said, I mean, when you ask them to come in those 2 days a week, are they doing things that you can only do in person to benefit the fact that you have humans in physical proximity to each other? We should do that. Yeah, you should do that. I mean, if you don't think about it. So what ends up happening is you have people who now have to commute 2 days a week. And what are they doing? They're processing emails and doing Zoom and Teams meetings from their desktop at work instead of their laptop at home. Other than that, it's the same thing. You want a recipe to tick people off. That's it, right? Because you're now taking away their autonomy. So you have to get creative and realize, what are we offering people when they come into the office that they cannot get anywhere, any way, shape, or form else? So are we coming together to do creative brainstorming things that we need people in person? Are we building relationships and trust? How are we building networks? Are we sharing and celebrating? Because there's certain human aspects, like we have a need to gather, we have a need to belong, we have a need to celebrate, we have a need to, that what we do matters. And smart leaders are designing, I mean, I have some clients that I work with, and they come into the office literally 2 days a month, and that's it. And those 2 days set them up for the other 28, 30 days they have in the month, so that they go back. But when they come together, they celebrate, they focus on things that they can only do in person. And so people feel like their relationship wells are filled up over that time. So what has changed? God, so much has changed, Tom. And we have to get really, the word for me is intentional. And I'll just give you another example. Before we went on air, I mentioned to you that I was working in the Philippines a couple of weeks ago. So the company I'm working with, they do virtual assistant work. So the company is completely virtual. And just to give you a sense of growth, in 2019, in June of 2019, the company had 2 virtual assistants and 1 manager. So 3 total headcount. We just did this. This is November 2023. They have 496 virtual assistants and 62 managers. So that's
Wow.
pretty strong growth by any counts. They only meet once a year in person, once a year. Like the company is completely virtual. But what they're doing is they realize, okay, I need to connect, communicate, and collaborate, but I need to do it virtually. So you work with the constraints and parameters you have, but you don't use them as excuses. Like, I don't know. How do you talk to people when they're not in person? I don't know. Well, if you don't know, then ask people who do know, because there are companies like the one in the Philippines who have figured this out. And if you don't know, part of being a leader is your willingness to park your ego and say, I've never done this before. And guess what? You can even ask your people, I've never done this before. What do you think would be the best way for us to structure this? And then listen to them. And then maybe they'll come up with some really good ideas. But yeah, this is very different from just a few years ago. And leaders need to respond accordingly.
Yeah, and that's fascinating in terms of one company gets their team together once a year. You cited the example of twice a month, but there's no formula there, but it's
Yeah.
all about how do you create an energized work culture, all very much depending on the unique circumstances and what your company looks like and what your team looks like.
Yeah, totally, totally. I think it would be, frankly, I think for some companies, it would be much better if the senior leader said, look, I need you back in the office 2 days a week. And it's not because of innovation and creativity. The reason I need you back in the office 2 days a week is, frankly, I have high control needs and it makes me feel better. Hey, that's honest, right? What wouldn't that be refreshing? Like, thank you. Yeah, and I think people would get it. They'd go along like, okay, you've got high control need. Do you feel better? Fine. We'll do that for the boss, whatever. So it's just to recognize that, yeah, it's like you said, there are ways and there is not a one size fits all solution to this problem.
Yeah. Uh, and we've also gotten into so much distraction, I think, over the last several years as well. And I know there's a strong connection between leadership and time management, effectiveness, performance. How can leaders simplify and improve what often seems like a lot of noise and distraction elements of communication, all the meetings and email and everything else?
Totally. So you just named the two. I call it the double-headed hydra, right? The big time sucks of our life, right? Which are meetings and emails. And the key there is simplification. I find so many organizations are really good at adding new initiatives and projects onto the plate, not so good at taking things off the plate. One of the things I coach leaders around is, I know you have a to-do list. What's on your to-don't list? What are you doing to take things off the plate? Because you cannot have 168 strategic priorities. You can have 168 things on your wish list, but 168, you can have one, strictly speaking, you can have one priority. That's what makes it the priority. Some people like to say up to three, but really, what is the most important thing that you do in structuring everything around that one thing? So to that end, I call it meeting hygiene and email hygiene. And I think we got to clean up our acts. And the fact is, leaders set the tone through your behavior, consciously or unconsciously. So, for example, this is an easy one to example, is lateness, right? So do you start your meetings on time? Like if you went to your company's CFO and said, I was thinking about flushing $6,000 on the toilet, you cool with that? You watch their head spin. But think about if we are starting our meetings 8 to 10 minutes late on every hour, think of the salaries in that room. Think of what we're doing. And again, we get what we tolerate. So that's just a simple example. Another example would be, do we have a culture where we need to invite everybody to every meeting and people have a hard time declining because, I don't want to seem rude, but you realize I'm not adding any value here. So, your willingness to say, love you all, but no, I'm declining and here's why, and so for us to have those honest conversations, and if we don't have them, then the culture just perpetuates these terrible habits. Same thing with email hygiene. What's with this whole reply all to everybody? Like, everyone, no one wants to get no one goes, oh my gosh, I need my inbox is lonely these days. Can you please fill it for me? No one, like, we're good. We're good. The days of 1981, you've got mail are done, right? Whatever. We need to really focus on how we can clean things up and make things simpler, which means taking things off the plate for people. And so, yeah, I write a whole chapter about meetings and emails on this, but there's a lot of simple tools that we can do. Also, another example with meetings would be make sure that there's an agenda before you go. In fact, make it a policy that if you have no clear agenda, I don't come to meetings. Sorry. It forces people to raise their game. And by the way, when I say an agenda, for example, you can't say today's agenda is the budget, because there's like 8 different meetings that the budget could be about. Are we discussing what we think should be in the budget? Are we hearing what you've decided in the budget? Are we making decisions? I think these are all different types of meetings. So we have to get really clear on what are we trying to do. And yeah, it takes effort. People should be on their A game when they're designing and facilitating meetings. I mean, that's what, when I lead trainings, I've facilitated a meeting and they are structured down to the minute. We have run sheets. Now, granted, the map is never always the territory, but without that clear outline, there is no way I'm going to be able to create that kind of level of energy in a room for 2 or 4 or 6 or 8 hours in a day. It takes planning. And that's what the kind of intentionality that leaders should be bringing to their meetings.
So what do you recommend to become a better leader? I mean, how do you build the skill sets of leadership?
Okay, great question. So the first place I would start, obviously, we're going to get into connection, communication, collaboration. There are skills you can do around that. But I'd say before we even get into that, I want to talk about the mindset. So in my research, only about 23% of people think their leaders lead well. Okay, that's not a very good number by my account. And so one of the big challenges, and I share that number with many leaders, and they say, how can that be? Don't people tell their leaders they're not very good? Well, you tell me, in your organization, would that fly? Because if you are not a good leader, there's a pretty lousy chance that you created the kind of trust where people can be that candid with you, which means that you sit in your little bubble of, I think I'm pretty good, and no one tells you, and you're blind to your own blindness. So the point I want to make here has to do with the fact that, and psychologists call this, by the way, the fundamental attribution error. And what it means is that we judge ourselves by our intentions, but we judge other people by our behavior, by their behavior, and vice versa. People judge us not by our intentions, but by our behavior. So as a leader, you need to find active ways to close the gap between what you intend. And trust me, I know you are a nice person. You get up in the morning, you want to make things good for your team and people, and you do. But life happens and you don't even recognize when you're actually falling down on that. So you have great intentions. If you want to close the gap between those intentions and the impact you're having, you need honest, candid, real-time feedback from people, which means you have to park your ego and take your status and kind of go low power and go to people and say, hey, I want to become a better leader. What could I be doing to support you to make you more effective? And if you don't even look, if you want to ask for feedback without asking for feedback because you feel like your culture can't support it, then just ask people, hey, what can I be doing to support you more? Because frankly, that's feedback right there. You're not using the feedback word, the F word, as one of my colleagues calls it. But it's a way to get there. You want to close that gap. You need intel. You need to hear from the people that you are impacting, what they think and how you can improve. And only then can you start to work on it. The fact is, feedback isn't good or bad. It's what you do with it. The classic piece of feedback analogy I use is the rumble strip on the side of the highway, right? It doesn't care if you go off the road, but it will remind you, it's a wake-up call. Hey, you've hit the side. You better think about getting back on course. If you can just think of feedback more value neutrally as this is information that can help me be better, it can serve you really well.
So what's next? From a leadership perspective, what do high performance firms look like today? And how do you think that's going to change over the next several years here?
Yeah. So great questions. You have such good questions, Tom. I think in terms of how
because I read your book and I just was able to kind of distill out some of the.
There we go.
It was very powerful. I got a lot out of it.
Awesome. I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled. So here's the thing. I think, and we've touched on some of these things, where they are today and where they're going to. The words that come to mind to me are fluid and flexible. And the only way you get to fluid and flexible is by being much more of a facilitator, because facilitators can flex and fluid and flow, whereas commanders in chief are rigid, right? So it's, yes, have a plan, but be willing to change your plan, right? Have a map, but know that your map is not the territory. Have a clear sense of things, but check to make sure that what your sense of things is actually aligned with what other people are thinking. I think it's going to be a lot more around connecting and communicating and collaborating. And, people have asked me about that. How do you see AI fitting into all this? I mean, the fact is, And we've seen this already. I mean, so much of the repetitive manual labor stuff has been turned into an algorithm or an app or outsourced or digitized. So a lot of that has gone away. So, and this is going to continue with AI. It's only going to take it to the next level. So the question for me is, what's left for human beings to do? It's going to be the things that are uniquely human. So having that, as you said, emotional intelligence, the awareness to know what's going on in terms of how am I working with you? How are you working with? Is this working well? Oh, it seems like this isn't working as well. Do I just let it go on, or do I stop and say, "Hey, can I check in with you? What's going on? What could I be doing different?" So it's bringing the human factor more so into humanity. People have asked me, what do you see the leaders of the future needing to be? And my answer to that is they need to be exceedingly human, right? That's what people are wanting. They're wanting exceptional human beings, not about being a superhero. It's about being a human who understands that it's humans leading other humans. And how do you go about doing that? It's by understanding to be a better connector, a better communicator, and a better collaborator.
Alain, thank you so much for your time. Really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks for your terrific questions. And I really appreciate the time being here with you.
You can get more information and resources on what we've been talking about today. And the book is really strong by going to the websites, either alainhunkins.com, which is ALAINHUNKINS.com, or crackingtheleadershipcode.com, which is the title of his book, Cracking the Leadership Code, 3 Secrets to Building Strong Leaders. Once again, Alain, thanks.
Thank you, Tom. It's my pleasure.